Hi there, my name is Summer.
My name is Gabe.
And I'm Marina.
Today we are going to give a helping hand to Mrs. Darnell by laying down some knowledge on you guys. We have a few thoughts pertaining to ding ding ding, felon enfranchisement. Shall we begin?
In the beginning, the dinosaurs roamed the land.
No, that's too far.
Okay. So when Alexander the Great conquered Macedonia.
Still too far.
Okay. Back in 1861, the United States found itself in a civil war which resulted in the abolishment of slavery. A few years later, in 1870, the 15th Amendment was passed, establishing that the citizens' right to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This was enacted to ensure voting rights for the recently emancipated African Americans. Not long after, states would be granted the right to determine voting regulations amongst its population.
With the states having the freedom to determine voter rights, there is variation amongst the states regarding convicts regaining their voting rights after being released from incarceration. We think this is total baloney. U.S. citizens who are previously convicted of a felony should not only reserve the right to vote in regards to the 15th Amendment, but also because they are affected by current legislation and policies. Reserving the right to vote will potentially increase voter turnout, reveal a more accurate representation of the nation, make way for citizens to rehabilitate into society after release, and improve living conditions within prisons.
There are many issues with the current system. When a person is convicted of a crime, they go to prison. When they are released from prison, they return to society as a free citizen. So why is the government limiting the voting rights to free citizens? The 15th Amendment is nationwide and should not vary from state to state. For example, Iowa and Virginia permanently revoked the right to vote for all felons, while Maine and Vermont allow prisoners to vote. Some states restore voting rights after completion of prison sentences, and others restore rights upon completion of parole or probation. Trying to restore your ability to vote in states like Alabama and Arizona can be difficult. It involves lengthy paperwork, burdensome documentation, and the involvement and coordination of several state agencies. And I think we can all say no one enjoys a tedious and discouraging wait and process to get through the DMV.
Historically, we can see the passage of laws that target minorities in order to politically handicap and/or imprison them. This includes laws like the Edmund Act, which has been commonly used to justify the disenfranchisement and fining of minorities. Cumulatively, the ability for states to determine their own voter rights regarding felons has created issues in regards to voter representation. Because there is such a variation of voting standards from state to state, there are gray areas when determining federal sentences, leaving situational wiggle room to target minorities. For example, African Americans are a minority that have suffered at the voting booths. In a recent study published in 2017, it was revealed that 1 in every 13 black adults in the U.S. currently cannot vote as a result of a felony conviction. And in 3 states, Florida, Kentucky, and Virginia, more than 1 in 5 black adults are disenfranchised. With that many disenfranchised voters, the African American community's voice is diminished and incrementally loses power at the ballot. This can be seen as a modern-day Jim Crow, and that's just one of many minorities groups targeted by the justice system. Ideally, all participants of the United States would have a say on legislation by which their lives are governed.
There's an estimated 6 million people who have lost their right to vote in America. We call our government a representative democracy while we abandon 6 million Americans who live in silence day after day without representation. That's more people than the entire population of Colorado. See, there's a little thing in American society known as the social contract. This means that people and the government agree to a set of universal moral and political standards in which we abide by in our everyday lives. Early in American history, we put the 8th Amendment into place, restricting the government from imposing unusual punishment onto those found guilty in the court of law. Committing a felony in one state leads to losing one's right to vote altogether, yet in others it is until the end of probation. Isn't it unusual that we would impose differing voting limitations for the same crime? When a criminal finishes their sentence, they are considered a free man and are expected to assimilate into society. But a free man in America should have the immediate right to vote. The regulations making it difficult to impossible to return the right to vote to a free man is a breach to the social contract. They can't have the right to vote or make decisions on laws, yet we expect them to still abide by them? By nature, we humans like to judge people, and the easiest way to communicate our judgment is by labels. Whether it's good or bad, fun or boring, we assign a cognitive stigma to nearly everything, including criminals and convicts. Classic labeling is not meant to make them feel welcomed into society, but rather secluded and feared. The effect of classic labeling typically results in the convict behaving the way a society thinks a criminal will behave. How can we expect convicts to assimilate back into society when we politically and socially exclude them?
Some argue that the felon vote would be minuscule and have an insignificant impact on elections. However, the 2004 presidential election between Al Gore and George W. Bush holds water, and that the population size of felons can actually be influential. Vanderbilt Law Review conducted a study arguing that Florida's strict criminal voting rights was critical in the success of George W. Bush. Florida is one in 4 states that permanently relinquishes a right to vote after conviction of a felony, unless rights are restored by the governor or court. Anyway, the study proceeds to argue that Al Gore would have won the state of Florida by more than 31,000 voters, thus winning the election. But since Florida is one of the 4 states with the strictest felon disenfranchisement, he lost. Deborah Parks agrees in her work, Ballot Boxes Behind Bars, stating that the reality that prisoners may have an impact on the outcome of elections is an argument in favor of allowing them to vote rather than against it. This goes to show that the felon votes could potentially sway national and state elections and policies.
Allowing felons to vote on policies that pertain to our prisons will provide additional insight to how prisons can be improved. As Mark Maurer explains in his article, Voting Behind Bars, those who have experienced a prison environment know how the system works, so it would be wise to take their expertise into consideration when reforming prison institutions. Many citizens believe that voting is a privilege, and that they lost that privilege when they broke the law. And that is true for those currently in prison, but once released and deemed a free citizen, it should again be an inherent right. Some believe that felons do not have sufficient judgment and therefore should not be allowed to make decisions about our policies. It is assumed that a prison sentence allows the individual to reflect on their wrongdoings and return with better judgment. In regards to judgment, the government does not hold intelligence tests for citizens to be able to vote, but rather relies on an age minimum of 18. Removing their rights to vote will not keep them from recidivating. It would be unreasonable to think that someone who steals a car lacks intelligence or moral reasoning regarding wars overseas, abortion, religion, healthcare, and education. People argue if a person repeatedly commits crimes, they should not retain the right to vote. Sentences will continue to become more severe with each crime committed, making it less likely for that person to regain their right to vote.
A common argument is that felons will not vote, even if they had their abilities to do so restored. Take a look around you. How many of your classmates do you think went out and voted in the last presidential election? What about local elections? More than likely, there are at least a few of us who don't participate. Does that mean that we too, those who did not and do not always participate in elections, be stripped of our rights to vote? The issue here lies in our voter turnout and the whole electoral process. The problem is not with the nature of the person, as it has just been made clear that both felons and citizens alike do not always utilize their ability to vote.
Though we agree that felons should have the automatic right to vote after release, there should be limitations. According to attorney Sandra Norman, those who commit voting crimes will have their right to vote removed. For the people that have been convicted of bribery, tampering with votes, and/or other forms of electoral fraud, will be prohibited from voting after release. It is necessary to continue to disenfranchise those who commit these crimes to ensure the validity of our electoral process. As it is, 99% of convictions are unrelated to voting crimes. Some might argue that if we automatically reinstate the right to vote to convicts who have committed acts against our society, why not for children? Why not for the mentally disabled? As a society, we have already agreed that children with undeveloped prefrontal cortexes and the limited ability to consider multiple aspects of an economical, political, or social issue are not ready to analyze prospective laws and political candidates. The mentally disabled may also not be able to perform mental tasks required to pass judgment. Adult convicts who are mentally healthy have the mental capacity to understand society and pass judgment on laws and representatives. Whether their judgment is agreeable is not up for the government to decide, and definitely not grounds to remove their right to vote. Majority of Americans have a limited knowledge about American politics, yet their ignorance does not lead to their losing the right to vote. Welcome to democracy.
In the case of Richardson v. Ramirez, 1974, plaintiffs brought forth a class action lawsuit against California's state secretary and election officials, challenging the permanent disenfranchisement of anyone convicted of an infamous crime. The U.S. Supreme Court reasoned that exclusion of felons from the franchise was a historically accepted practice and may be lawful when applied equally to all felons. The acceptance of precedents is not always appropriate. The equal treatment of felons should be further scrutinized rather than chalking it up to whatever the last guy said. Secondly, felons are not treated equally. The same crime can result in differences in voting rights depending on the state. Instead, all states should have uniformity when it comes to the matter of felon rights. Should the government be allowed to violate some of the most essential aspects of our democracy because it's quote-unquote equal?
The current reinstatement of felon voting rights varies from state to state, and we should take steps to organize them on a federal scale. The Republican Party has established their interest in maintaining disenfranchisement laws. Studies have shown that the majority of felons would align with the Democratic Party. If it is within the best interest of the nation, who cares about the Republican Party's feelings? We shouldn't limit the people's rights to vote because of the possibility they will vote for a particular party.
Another barrier to our argument is the constitutionality of it. It is currently established in the Constitution that the states have the authority to regulate voting. So, let's amend it. We are an evolving nation with an ever-changing populace. Of course, amending the Constitution will take a great deal of time, whether it's petitioning or gaining support within and outside of Congress. The task at hand will not be a particularly easy one, and will require a shift in ideological and social normative beliefs among politicians and the people. We call for an amendment to the Constitution to create a nationwide voting law that automatically re-registers convicts to vote. This will eliminate the inconsistency of voting rights between states and any difficult process one might have to undergo to politically participate. So, what can you do? Call your representative and ask them to support the cause. Talk to your friends about equal representation for citizens. Just talk to anyone and everyone. Friends, family, Uber drivers, Tinder dates, your waiter, that lady who's checking you out at the grocery store, the guy that just happens to DM you 30 seconds after you change your relationship status to single, you name it. The point is, spread the word, because unless people are aware and care about this prospective amendment, there is no way it'll be ratified.